Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming to the Holland Land Office Museum tonight. I know we're competing with the Downs, but I think we've got the better show. So,
Hands down.
yes. So I want to welcome you all to our concert series. This is sort of an expansion we've started over the past few years to get something other than just history, though tonight we're having history still, but to have a little fun with it. So we're very happy to have Mr. Don Dwyer back for the third time. He's been back the past couple years focusing on music of the Civil War, but considering it's the bicentennial of the Erie Canal, it's only appropriate that he shares some of the wonderful music that arose out of the canal era. So, Mr. Dwyer.
Thank you. Now, it's funny he says the wonderful music, because the early part of the 1800s, the music was not much. It did not entertain. You wouldn't like it. I really had a hunt, and I found some songs that I thought were kind of pleasing to the ear, that people wouldn't throw their shoes at me like they do in Iraq. And anyway, I'm going to go kind of in chronological order of the canal, but I just wanted to throw one thing out in case I forget, which I so often do. Since we're here in Batavia, we were just talking before about this. I was reading a lot about it in the last couple of weeks, that there were various plans for where to build the canal. But one of them was they were going to go, one of the plans was to go diagonally from Rochester across the state to Buffalo. In other words, not continuing along the lake, not going to Lockport, just diagonally across. And which meant that there would have been a port right here in Batavia. But they decided not to because they couldn't. There was an elevation problem between the lake and the canal. The canal was fairly higher than the lake, and they had to fill the canal. Filling the canal with water was something that was always under consideration no matter where they were, and they wouldn't have been able to do it. And the various streams apparently were not hefty enough to do that. Or the canal would have been right here in Batavia. And speaking of the canal, I'm going to start with really the favorite song, the song that everybody knows. The Erie Canal song, or Low Bridge, Everybody Down, which everybody knows. I just sang last Friday in Wayne County in the town of Ontario for a school thing, and for, I don't know, several hundred kids, middle school kids. And so we had it divided up into mods, and they all knew Low Bridge, Everybody Down. So they were all singing, they were dancing. It was really kind of fun. But this song, as popular as it was, it has a great feel, and I'm sorry I'm raspy this evening, but it has a great canal feel. The classic canal, when you had mules and sometimes horses pulling the boats, very quiet, pastoral, at least that's what people thought, and to a great degree it's true, and that's what people liked. So that's what this song sounds like. So you're thinking 1840, 1850, and the guy who wrote this song probably lived along the canal, maybe even worked there because he's got such a feel for it. But that's not true. It was written by a guy named Thomas Allen. He was born in 1876 in Boston. He didn't even get to central New York, Rochester, till 1910. He wrote the song in 1910. And for all intents and purposes, the canal was gone. It was now the barge canal, really, and not quite, but it was. And the reason he wrote it, he was a musician, he was a songwriter, he wrote for Tin Pan Alley in New York City, so he was a very talented man. And he would run orchestras, and he was in Rochester to run a couple of orchestras, so the business end of the music. And people kept coming up to him and saying how they missed the Erie Canal, that old feel with the mules, because in Rochester, you probably know, the canal came right through the middle of the city. Built a great aqueduct. Aqueduct is still there, but it's for cars and people, and going over the Genesee River. And they really missed that. So he wrote this song. And it became a big hit. And it wouldn't have been if these people weren't voicing their great nostalgia for the old canal. Well, I got a mule, her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker, a good old pal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She hauls some barges in our day, filled with timber and coal and hay. We know every inch of the way from Albany to Buffalo. Oh, bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, we're coming to a town. You always know your neighbor, you always know your guy. You ever activated on the Erie Canal. We better look around for a old cow on 15 miles on the Erie Canal. You can bet your life I'll never part with sound. 15 miles on the Erie Canal. Get off mule, here comes a lot. We'll be thrown by 6 o'clock. One more trip, but back we'll go, right back home to Buffalo. Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, coming to a town. You always know your neighbor, you always know your town. You never navigated on the Erie Canal. Where would I be if I lost my cow? 15 miles on the Erie Canal. Like to see you do as good as my sound. 15 miles on the Erie Canal. A friend of mine has got a song, and now he's courting a broken jaw. She let fly with an iron tongue, kicked him home to Buffalo. Oh, bridge, everybody down. Oh, bridge, you're coming to the town. You always know your neighbor, you always know your town. You never navigated on the Erie Canal. Now, the idea of building a waterway to the west was not a new one. It was one that was dreamed about by an awful lot of people early on, but they really never seriously thought of building a big, long canal. It goes really back seriously to George Washington. When George, and my hero, never even knew he was involved with canals and waterways, but he was. The Revolutionary War was over. He was looking forward to being retired. It didn't last long because he started staying up nights. This was his fear. As you know, the Appalachian Mountains go from Maine down to Georgia. You really couldn't get from one place to the other. It was very difficult. It was an arduous journey. It was a dangerous journey. Some people did it. Some Americans crossed over. Now, this was his fear. This was Washington's fear. He said he felt that if you weren't doing commerce with the people, they no longer would be part of you. He thought, if we can't trade back and forth, this just isn't going to work. And they'll start trading with people that they can get to. People coming down the Mississippi River. And that would be the Canadians/British in the north, the French and the Spanish in the south. And those people would cease to be Americans in his viewpoint. And it kept him up nights. So he had to do something, because he was a man of action. He didn't talk about it, he did. He lived in Virginia, of course. There was already a company called the Potomac Company that wanted to use a natural waterway, the Potomac River, to get up over the mountains. And they thought they could do it. Now, it was a huge ask to do. And they basically faded away. I don't know if they were bankrupt, but they weren't doing very much anymore, so Washington took it over. They were missing management and leadership and money. And Washington provided all three. He was a brilliant manager. He was a brilliant leader. And while he isn't going to finance this, this is George Washington. He just won the Revolutionary War. There was no rich man in the country that he would approach and explain what was this terrible thing that was going to happen if we didn't get this done, and that person isn't going to open up their purse and help him. Because there are other downfalls to not fixing this. The 13 states were strung along the Atlantic seaboard, at the pin between the Atlantic Ocean and the mountains. No way to expand. They would be pinned there. If the people on the other side were no longer Americans, you weren't going to expand in this great American continent that we now enjoy. Was never going to happen. And he felt that this was just really important. And of course, Washington was a great surveyor. He had a long career in surveying, so he could do it. So they started to build. It was very difficult. But they had an infusion of cash. They had good engineering, according to what I've read. They had good engineering. But this is what you get with a natural waterway. It floods in the spring, and the water is too low in the summer. You had way too short of a navigation season. His plan was to go up this river and use a series of 5 canals to get around the waterfalls and the rapids, and that was the plan. Harder to do than you would think. And unfortunately for the Potomac Company, but fortunately for our country, he was elected president. And so he's gone now. He's gone for 2 terms, he's gone for 8 years, and then when he finally is available at the end of his 2nd term, he only lives 2 more years, dies I think 1799. So they didn't have him. They ran into problems. They ran into an area where they had to deal with an elevation and build blocks. Hard to do in those days. And it took them 7 years. So they burned all their money up. And unfortunately, they went bankrupt. Now this is a song. And I would hope maybe you could help me sing it. As I told you, I'm raspy. You feel sorry for me, don't you? So I need some help. It's called The Erie Was Rising. And it's about a boat on the canal. And the Erie is rising. And it's taking a long time to get back to Buffalo. And this group they're afraid they're running out of gin. And I'm looking around at this room, and I know you would be concerned about that. I just looked at it. That's the kind of a crowd you are. So this is how, I'll sing it with you. This is how the refrain goes. Oh, the Erie was rising, and the gin was getting low. Could we all say that? The Erie was rising, and the gin was getting low. This gentleman up here, there's a tear in his eye. And I scarcely think I'll get another drink till I get to Buffalo. And I scarcely think I'll get another drink till we get to Buffalo. 40 miles from Albany, forget it, I never shall. Oh, what a terrible storm we had that night on the Erie Canal. Oh, the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. I scarcely think I'll get another drink till I get to Buffalo. Till I get to Buffalo. We were loaded down with barley, we were chocked up full with rye, and the captain, he looked down at me with his terrible evil eye. And the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low, and I scarcely think I'll get another drink till I get to Buffalo. Till I get to Buffalo. Now I thought she was a grand old girl. She wore a ragged dress. We hoist her up the mast as a signal of distress. And Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. I scarcely think I'll get another drink till we get to Buffalo. Till we get to Buffalo. Now lay me on the horse bridge, I head up by the bow, and let it be a lockport, let the roaring tunnel wanders down. And the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. I scarcely think I'll get another drink till I get to Buffalo. Till I get to Buffalo. Now 2 days out from Syracuse, our vessel struck ashore. We all that like to be found put on a chuckle like a waterfall. And the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. And I scarcely think we'll get another drink till I get to Buffalo. Till we get to Buffalo. Now I hollered to the driver on the footpath, treading dirt. He took the board and stopped the leak with his old red flannel shirt. And the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. And I scarcely think I'll get another drink till we get to Buffalo. Till we get to Buffalo. Our captain, he got married, and our cook, she went to jail. And I'm the only son he got left to tell the tale. And the Erie was rising, the gin was getting low. I scarcely think we'll get another drink till we get to Buffalo. Till we get to Buffalo. Thank you very much. Now, Washington's Potomac Company was not the only group of people that were trying to build a waterway. There was one in New York, in eastern New York, though it was not as aggressive. It was called the Western Inland Navigation Company. It was around the same time as the 1880s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and then even a little bit further. Their idea was just to improve navigation, trying to go into the interior a bit of New York and then hook up with the Hudson River and take the goods down to New York City where they would be sold. That's what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to, their goal was not to build a canal to Lake Erie. It just wasn't. They were trying to do this, and this was a big deal. And it was a group of investors. It was privately held, just like the Potomac Company, government not paying anything. So another Revolutionary War hero, Philip Schuyler, General Philip Schuyler from eastern New York, and his group tried to do the same thing. Now what they did is they used the Mohawk River, so they were using, again, and it wasn't a canal, they built canals when the Mohawk River would run into waterfalls and rapids and such. They would connect to the, but always coming back to the river. Again, the river was the same problem. Dry in the summer, flooding in the spring, short navigation season. Apparently the engineers did a wonderful job, but they could only get so far. Money was a problem. Maintenance cost a fortune, and they eventually went bankrupt. But you know, they were not really a failure. You want to know where they got to? They actually, one of their canals actually got to Rome, New York. And if you know, you probably know, Rome, New York is where the Erie Canal was built from. That was the starting point, the middle of the state. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is.
This is another song. Again, I'm needing your help. And it's called "Oh, Dat Low Bridge." They do a lot of that. I guess there's not that much to think about on the canal. You know what they used to write a lot of songs about? Their mules. Every my mule, Sal my mule, Sal my mule. It's too many. He's wondering what's going on with these guys and their mules. But anyway, "Oh, Dat Low Bridge," because the bridges were, many of them were constructed too low. You know, you needed to go up higher. The townships didn't have the money or didn't care. Because on the Erie Canal, there were 300 bridges built. So it's a lot of bridges. So, I will sing the first couple of lines. It's many miles to Buffalo. Oh, that low bridge, balky mule, he travels slow. Oh, that low bridge. Then I'll take it, and then we come to the chorus. Look out, that low bridge. 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 If you can do that, that would be great. It's many miles to Buffalo. Oh, that low bridge. Balky mule, he travels slow. Oh, that low bridge. There's gravel on the towpath. There's hornets in the sand. Pity poor canal is so far away from land. Look out that low bridge. 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 Captain Cook and all the crew, now duck your heads way down. Fastest ship in all the fleet, two sisters come to town. There's many locks to shut you in. Oh, that low bridge. Every word must learn to swim. Oh, that low bridge. We're loaded down with bargain and timber from the west. Now every poor canaler, please do your level best. Look out that low bridge. 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 The captain, cook, and all the crew, now tuck your heads way down. That's just floating on the beach, two sisters come to town. Now it froze up in the winter time. Oh, that low bridge. Summer hours, sun do shine. Oh, that low bridge. In rain or stormy weather, the captain's on the poop. We're huddled up together like chickens on the coop. Oh, that low bridge. Oh, that low bridge. Oh, that low bridge. Oh, that low bridge. The captain, cook, and all the crew, and tuck your heads way down. Fastest boat in all the crew, three sisters come to town. Now there's groceries in the cabin barn. Oh, that low bridge never leaks, she's filled with tar. Oh, that low bridge, there's freckles on the children, there's glanders on the goose, mosquitoes by the million that keep the golden rule. Look out that low bridge. 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 The captain, cook, and all the crew, now duck your heads way down. So ship and all the crew, two sisters come to town.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your singing. Now, there was no real direction anymore. That Western Inland Navigation Company was gone, and yet this trouble remained. You know, at that time, and I'm talking about the early 1800s, 1805, 1810, there was nobody living up in this part of the state. Very sparsely populated. Somebody had to get the ball rolling. There were dreamers who dreamt of building a canal. There were some, but nobody that really could get anything done. And then there was a guy named Jesse Hawley. He was born in 1773. He's from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Jesse was never anything special. As a matter of fact, he was, I think, I dare say, less than special. But he did do one thing in his life before he went back to mediocrity. Now, he was a flour merchant in central New York, and a mediocre flour merchant. He was also, what he would do would collect the wheat from the farmers, turn it into flour. But now the hard part came. as it did for so many people up here who tried to make a go of it. They had to find reliable and affordable transportation to New York City to sell their goods. Something that wouldn't bankrupt them. It didn't really exist. It cost a fortune from up here. To give you an example, when the canal was open, transportation was $10 a ton. At this time, it was $100 a ton. Tremendous difference. Jesse Hawley looked all over the place. His business is going kapooey, unfortunately for him. And he had a partner who stole $10,000 of their assets. So that didn't help. But eventually he went bankrupt. And you know what happened to people in 1806 when they went bankrupt? They went to debtor's prison. Now he took off to Pennsylvania, but eventually his conscience got the better of him. And he came back and he went to jail. Now, I say jail, it was for 20 months. It was in central New York, and it was a hotel. A hotel in which the first floor were guests, the second floor were inmates. And it was owned by the sheriff. So, pretty good deal for a lot of people there. But instead of wasting his time, he was overcome with the loss of his business. He couldn't take it. So he's trying to figure out a way, how could I have saved this? And he knew the problem was transportation. Now, when he was in business, he was waiting for the Western Inland Navigation Company to come out to central New York. But as I told you, they got as far as Rome before they went under. So he was waiting for it. It didn't happen. There had to be a way. So what he started doing morning, noon, and night are studying surveys and maps of upstate New York. There were certainly enough done. He constantly looked at them and started taking notes. And before too long, before the next year, 1806, he discovered, you know, this canal can be built. There are obstacles to overcome that I think they can be overcome. But this can be done. And he was filled with enthusiasm. He was on fire. He was a madman, as a matter of fact. Finally, he took all his findings, and his findings included things like, this is where the canal should be built. He mapped it out, where you should be building the canal. It makes the most sense, efficient, less obstacles to get over. This is how many men it will take, this is how long it will take, and this is how much it will cost. That's pretty good for a flour merchant.
Wow.
And a mediocre flour merchant. But here he was doing something of genius, and he wasn't a genius, but he had a flash. So he wrote 14 different essays that were printed over the space of time in one of the newspapers, and people started to read it, including people who could do things. William Kirkpatrick and Joshua Foreman, they were legislators in the New York State Legislature, and they were looking to build a canal. And they read this and they poured over the genius that he had put out, that Jesse had put out. I said, we can get this done. Meanwhile, there was articles in the newspaper. President Thomas Jefferson was giving interviews explaining, first of all, the United States was flush with cash, enormously profitable and prosperous. And the federal coffers were overflowing. And Thomas Jefferson said, well, we're not going to sit on this money. We're prosperous right now, and we want to stay prosperous, so we're going to do infrastructure. We're going to build roads and bridges and canals. And their eyes popped open, and they said, let's go to Washington. Well, they did, and they got an interview with Jefferson. And as they're going through the interview, now this was very detailed stuff, he had to be impressed with it. But he wasn't. He referred to it as a little short of madness. Now that's not a compliment where I come from. So it was no. Now how did he change his mind on something like this? And there are people who thought he got overcome with himself making all these promises. He was a small federal government guy. He felt everything should be done at the state. And here he was doing this massive job. And he started, that's what some people think. Personally, I think Thomas Jefferson was a weenie at heart. I've read so much about Thomas Jefferson. He's really not, in my viewpoint, not a real likable guy. Brilliant, and the things he accomplished were spectacular. He really was. He was good friends with George Washington for a while, up until maybe the end of his first term. And then he started going behind Washington's back to opposition newspapers, feeding them things. Washington hated being president during his second term. He could not wait for it to be over. And a lot of that falls at the feet of Thomas Jefferson. When Washington died, he was kind of obligated to make that long trek out to Mount Vernon to call on the widow, Martha Washington. Except she hated Thomas Jefferson. So he was there for 3 days because you're not getting on a bus and going home. And she just hated him. Anyway, he was a weenie. We can take that away from tonight, I think. But the biggest thing that got on now was these two guys, Kirkpatrick and Foreman, they were not heartbroken. They said, we can do this. We just need to find the money. It's not a small amount. As you know, the canal ended up costing $7 million. Back then, that's a lot of money. But a gentleman named DeWitt Clinton now got involved. DeWitt Clinton was a steam engine for the canal. And he knew the people, and he had it was his reason for living, and continued to be almost for the rest of his life. He had all kinds of experience. He had been in both houses of the New York State Legislature. He had worked in his uncle's administration when his uncle was governor of New York. He had been 3 times mayor of New York City. This guy knew people that could get things done. He could bend arms and get a project off the ground. He eventually became, of course, 3 times governor of New York. And with him at the helm, they full steam ahead. It was slowed down by the War of 1812, unfortunately, because that's going to take priority. However, the War of 1812 helped them a little bit. It was another argument, because there was the story of it was so difficult to get munitions and things shipped for the Americans to ship to where they needed them in the country for the battles. There's the story of the cannon that cost $400, that cost $1,000 to transport. So the canal would really take care of a lot of that. And the canal was inland. There were a lot of people who said, why don't you just use Lake Ontario? Well, that's a British lake. That's a British lake, and you wouldn't have a chance. So there were a lot of things pushing for it. And finally, in 1816, the legislature said, yes, we're going to do it. And they financed it. Was the fighting over? No. But they had formed what we call a canal commission. Clinton was in charge of it, and he was unbelievable. He really rode herd. Now this is a song, kind of a silly song, but it's really not about a mule in a big way. So that's a plus. What they did on the canal a lot of times is, they're looking for songs to sing. And sometimes they would take songs from the popular writers of the day. Stephen Foster. They took a lot of Stephen Foster songs. They would just flat out play them. But some of them they wrote other words to. And this one's called Runaway Mules. And it's about a guy who was a mule driver, so he's pulling the mules along the canal. And he loses them. They get away from him. And now the interesting part of the story comes when he is addressed by a talking bullfrog. It's happened to me. And he's addressed by a talking bullfrog, and who said, hey, listen, if you can get me a bag full of flies, I will help you recover those mules. And that's the story. Now the mules ran up, and I fell down. I really thought I'd croak. And the bullfrog yelled, look out there, boy, I'll jump right down your throat. And that night was a hummer, all fear is there in style. And I looked beyond his capers for a lovely old canal. That night was a hummer, all fear is there in style. flies don't be a bar. Last night was a hug, last night it was a style, and I looked upon the Cape of Stone, I looked at the old canal. Last night was a hug, he was pure style, for I looked beyond his cape, for I loved the old canal. Now, when the thing in a song that makes the most sense is a talking bullfrog, you wonder, what are these people writing? A lot of it doesn't make any sense. I think they're all insane.
Something to do with the gin, I think.
Yeah, there we go. We're back to the gin. Now, the long and winding road of actually putting a shovel in the ground for the Erie Canal ended on July 4th, 1817, in Rome, where the canal started. Now, one thing that really was going to be a problem going forward, was the manpower. Not a lot of people lived in the northern part of the country, in the northern part of New York. They were starting to come up because as the canal, word of the canal came, people they smelled opportunity. And one of the people that really were a big help, had a large influence on the canal for working were the Irish. Now, they weren't the only ones, because I am Irish on all four sides, but they get too much credit in a lot of things. And there were probably just as many Germans. Like in the Civil War, people who study the Civil War, you know about the Irish Brigade and all these Irish regiments who were wonderful and were gallant. But there were actually more German. There were 180,000 Irish fighting for the North. There were 230 Germans. So they had a part in this too. But where are you going to get those people? Well, one of the things the state did, probably the Canal Commission, led by DeWitt Clinton, they started parceling out pieces of the project to people who were interested. If you owned a farm, now you are really looking forward to this canal. It's going to save you a fortune. It's going to make your livelihood. Towns and businesses. So they would take a chunk of the job. They would act as a subcontractor. They would hire the workers, they'd give them the tools, because these were the people who were really incentivized to build it fast and to build it well, because they wanted to use it, and they wanted to use it soon. So what they started to do is as they were looking for people, they were looking for immigrants who were pouring into the country at that time, especially Irish immigrants. And they would go down to New York City and they would post signs, advertisements, and the Irish liked what they heard. The sign would say, meat 3 times a day. They'd just come from Ireland, they probably weren't eating at all. Meat 3 times a day, lots of bread and vegetables, and a reasonable amount of whiskey. Well, that last part really got them as they were pouring in, because they didn't make a lot of money. The average wage was 50 cents a day, all the way up to $1, depending on what job you were performing. But manual labor was probably 50 cents. But the Irish were above all that. They were interested in more than money, because they were also going to be paid off in whiskey. The Advents attract them, and we talked about that, but what they would do on the job is you would get a shot of whiskey at 6 a.m., another shot at 4 p.m., and a sip every hour in between. What's a sip? What's a sip in the middle of a hot day? So they would drink sometimes 12 to 20 ounces. Wow, pretty brutal.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yes, as this one writer, Damien Galone, said, when you add whiskey to gunpowder and sharp tools, you end up having guys with nicknames like Lefty, One-Eyed Sean, and Jimmy No Hands.
Yeah.
Now, believe it or not, up to 50,000 people worked on the canal. Some of them might have worked only for a few days. The Irish were kind of permanent, so that's why they're identified. There's a wonderful book called Canal Water and Whiskey, talking about the Irish on the canal, and I used some things from that book. But they not only built the canal, and that was a tremendous contribution. The immigrants, not just the Irish, who came up to work, settled New York State. So they would work on the canal, they would save their money, and eventually they would buy a farm, or they would get a job. As an example, in the eastern part of the state, people are familiar with Johnstown,
Yeah.
Gloversville, that area.
Yeah.
It was a canal town, that area. And my relatives were there. My two great aunts lived there. They were like my grandparents. They raised my father when his parents died. And they would take me, they were from Brooklyn, I'm from Brooklyn originally. They would take me everywhere. The Yankees game, me and my brother, the World's Trade Center, things like that. Wonderful people, they retired, they're both up there in Johnstown, and they're buried. So my wife and I, we went up there one time to look at the grave marker, because we wanted to put a Celtic cross, and it didn't have their birth and death dates, so we wanted to do that. So we looked at that, but we couldn't find it. We started stupidly at one end, the old end, and you had to go 2/3 of the way through the cemetery before you found a name that wasn't Irish. So they did a wonderful thing. Now, this next song I'm going to do was written by a guy named James Bland. Bland was born in 1854 in Flushing, New York. He had an unusual childhood. Now, he died in 1911. He's a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He wrote over 700 songs. He's spectacular. And he had two nicknames: the world's greatest minstrel man, or the Black Stephen Foster. So he was a black songwriter, and supposedly the first successful one. He was spectacular, because of those 700 songs, he wrote songs that, people like me who kind of know 19th century music, but even stuff that's played now, because I play at some of those events. He wrote songs like In the Evening by the Moonlight. Didn't know it was written all that long ago, but it was. Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. And a really great song called Golden Slippers.
Oh, yes.
You know Golden Slippers?
Oh, yes.
Wonderful song. Now it's written by James Bland, a black man, probably in the 1870s. He wrote it in 1880s. But yet it's played by everybody who plays 19th century music. Old-timey people who play old-timey music, they play it because it's a great tune. And it's a song with words, and I've sung them. It's about a big black family that is divided amongst other towns, and now they're all getting together for a wedding or a reunion of sorts. Well, great tune. And eventually, though, as he was growing up, his father became the first patent examiner in the U.S. Patent Office in Washington. So they moved to Washington from Flushing, and he went to school there, and he worked as a page in the House of Representatives. And then when he finished high school, he and his father both went off to college, to Howard University. His father wanted to be a lawyer, but he wanted to be a musician, and that's all he wanted to be. He was a banjo player. I guess he probably wrote most of his songs that way. He was a good banjo player. And so he wanted to play in a minstrel group. I'm sure you're probably all aware of minstrel groups. They were white fellows with blackface, and they would go from city to city, singing their songs and doing their skits. They'd be in Washington, New York, Albany, all the way to Buffalo. And that's what he wanted to do, so he tried to get into a minstrel group. Remember though, he's already pre-blackface. They didn't want him. But it was the best thing that ever happened to him. He got into an all-black group. I didn't know they had them. And they were highly successful. They toured Europe. They played for Queen Victoria and the Prince of Wales. And this guy, James Bland, he was making $10,000 a year. Big money back then, especially for an itinerant musician. And while you're a songwriter, these days you make some money, but those days the copyrights were, well, let's say they were liquid. You never knew if you were going to get cheated. Just a second, let me get this up here. So anyway, this song, they took the words and they changed it and they called it Oilskin Slickers. Because on the canal,
Okay.
you're working on the boats, you're the crew, you're working on the boats, you're pulling the mules, you're guiding the mules. If it's pouring, it doesn't matter. You're still working, you're working in inclement weather. There was no cabin to work from, to guide. You had to be out there. So what they would do is they would develop these, that reminds me, I went to take some water. you needed to cover yourself. So they would get clothing, impregnate them with oil and that sort of thing, and tar. Now they were waterproof. So they were called oilskin slickers. And this is the song. Now when the storm comes up, we don our skins, keep us warm and dry and soft. But when those sheets were gone before, in our oilskins we were safely moored. And them oilskin slickers, oh, and them oilskin slickers, hats or creatures, rubber boots, we can keep dry when the torrents shoot. And oh, them oilskin slickers, oh, them oilskin slickers, as we gaily move along down the old canal. Now the oilskin slip down to our boots, a long-tailed hat to catch the shoots, the water musk as we slip along, while on the board you'll hear this song. And oh, them oilskin slickers, oh, them oilskin slickers, hat on creatures, rubber boots, so we can keep dry with the torrent shoot. And oh, them oilskin slickers, oh, them oilskin slickers, as we gaily move along down the old canal. Now there's oilskins sure protect us from many things I'll not discuss. The weather I can sink or swim, I'll keep them handy, my oilskin. Night when thunder and lightning came, our headlights shone upon the main. Ah, so beautiful now, I'm on the old canal. And oh, them oilskin slickers, oh, them oilskin slickers, pack of breeches, rubber boots, so we can keep dry with the torrents shoot. And oh, and them oilskin slickers, oh, and them oilskin slickers, as we gaily move along down the old canal. And as we gaily move along down the old canal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You've got a lot of slippers.
Now, as the canal neared completion, let's see, the canal finished in October of 1825, so we're in April of 1824. In the meantime, Clinton has been governor twice, and then his party, he was in the People's Party in New York, I don't know what they were other than that, and he didn't get the nomination. So he's, at this point in time, he is not the governor. So it's April. In November, there is a governor's election. And it doesn't look like he's going to get the nomination this time either. He rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. He was, a lot of brilliant people are like that, but he was really like that. And there was a guy named Talmadge who was the darling of the party. So he has no job, elected position. He's the head of the Canal Commission, now, which is unpaid. But if you're the head of the Canal Commission and you're building the Erie Canal, this was the biggest news in the country. People are following this with bated breath. So he's getting more pub than the governor, no doubt. He's the most important person in the state. But he was hated by his opponents. The Democrats, for instance, wanted him out of the picture completely because they knew he had presidential aspirations. And people would know him, and you could say, hey, listen, I built the Erie Canal. Well, I think you'd probably make a pretty good president. And they wanted him invisible. They wanted him out of the picture. So, again, it's April 24. And the legislatures, the two branches, they're closing for the season. And literally, they're closing. People are putting on their coats when one of the people in this Democratic group got up and made a motion to eliminate DeWitt Clinton from the Canal Commission. Now, can you imagine? He's Mr. Canal. But they pulled it off. Both pieces of the New York State legislature voted for it. And one guy got up, who was a friend of his, and from Montgomery County, got up and said, you're going to be successful doing what you're doing here today. But you're not going to like the way this is going to end up. It is going to bounce against you. Now, he was not going to be governor. This Talmadge guy was going to get the nomination, so he was not going to be governor. But they played their hand. too heavily. And they said, the people will not stand for this. And he was so right. Thousands of people in New York City and thousands of people in Albany, the capital, came out demonstrating. Now, not like now, they're not throwing bottles through windshields, but they came out demonstrating. In New York City, they couldn't find a building big enough to hold them all. The people were really PO'd. And now the state, the People's Party was really afraid, this is our guy, and he's gotten screwed. And one of the guys who helped screw him was this Talmadge. So they were embarrassed into giving him the nomination for governor, and he won. They couldn't give it to Talmadge because it was known that Talmadge was part of this deal. And but Talmadge became the lieutenant governor. Now, how awkward is that? Yeah, as you're going to hear in a second. So he won the governorship anyway, and so he's back, and it's so fair because the next year, when the Erie Canal is finished and they're taking the victory lap, he's the guy that should be there, not some other clown, not Talmadge. And so that was all's well that ends well. The canal is finished. It's October 26, 1825. Clinton and Talmadge are in Buffalo, along with a lot of other dignitaries, to start this raucous celebration that really was all over the country, but especially in the state of New York. It made the state of New York. It brought in people, it brought in money, and people were prosperous because of it. They loved it. They couldn't believe that they pulled this off. They were firing cannons, they were firing muskets, and at one point they fired cannons in Buffalo, down to Lockport, and then all along the canal, each town would fire muskets, and then they would get to Albany, and then all the way down the Hudson River, all the way down to Sandy Hook, New Jersey. Yeah. And then reverse from Sandy Hook all the way up and all the way up. So it was really, to say it was raucous is really an understatement. So the thing that you have to admire, there were major parties, every single town. They would be firing all the fireworks and all of that, and then they were in for banquets and drinking. And again, I know you people will appreciate that. You've really got to hand it to him. This guy is drinking in how many towns? All the way to the Hudson River. Yeah, really, pretty amazing. The first place they went to was Rochester. Rochester, it was pouring rain, didn't stop anybody. Everybody, it was a wild celebration, except in Rome, of all places. See, the people in Rome were unhappy with the Erie Canal. The reason being, and the newspapers were getting them all stirred up. And it was really ridiculous, but they were getting them all stirred up because the old Western Inland Navigation Company had left its canal right into the middle of the city in Rome, and they liked that. But the Erie Canal didn't do it like that. They did it the most efficient way, which meant they're not getting off route to go into a town. And they were really furious. Now, the newspaper tried to get everybody to come, it was in headlines, they tried to get everybody to come to the celebration wearing funeral garb. Wow, that's really kicking you where you don't belong. But it went on, and every place, especially in Albany, and then they were towed down the Hudson by steamships, and by this time there were other boats. And meanwhile, what he's doing, Clinton, he is going in a boat that was built specifically for the occasion. It was called the Seneca Chief. By the way, there's a replica Seneca Chief, and it's coming up late September, early October. And I'm playing in 2 of those cities. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. Well, they got to New York, and one of the things that they had done in Buffalo, I thought that was really great. Jesse Howley, the guy who had written the 14 essays that got the whole thing going, he was a nobody before, and he was a nobody afterwards. He had never met Clinton, but this is one magnanimous thing that Clinton did, because he was not known for being magnanimous. He invited him to Buffalo to speak, which I thought was a really nice touch. So they're in New York, and they're giving all their speeches, and apparently, and they're giving all these speeches, and Clinton gave a great one. Well, there was a song written for the a guy named Samuel Woodward, who was a well-known poet, songwriter. He wrote this song to commemorate the moment. I really like it. I'm gonna do it as I close the evening out. It was sung by an Irishman. Of course it was sung by an Irishman. Because they're the best. A guy named Keane sung this song. The name of the song is The Meeting of the Hudson and the Erie. When they arrived at the dock in New York City, 2 casks of water from Lake Erie was then poured into the Atlantic Ocean. 13 bottles of water from various great rivers from around the world, the Niles, the Ganges, the Mississippi. There were 13 of them. They were all poured, and a couple of them, besides the Mississippi, there was also from the Hudson. They were all poured together. There was a British warship parked off, striking the American colors. So I thought that was the meeting of the Hudson and the Erie. Today be forever remembered with pride that beheld the proud Hudson and the Erie alive on the last sand of time. Through the glass shall descend. Ere a union so fruitful, whose glory may end. A union so fruitful, whose glory may end. Genius has triumphed and science prevailed. Oh, prejudice flooded and envy assailed. It is that the vassals of Europe may see the progress of mind in a land that is free. A progress of mind in a land that is free. Oh, hail to a project so vast and sublime, a bond that shall never be severed with time. Now it unites us still closer, oh, jealousy cease. And our hearts like a water are mingled in peace. Our hearts like a water are mingled in peace. Thank you. I wonder if anybody has any questions. Unfortunately, you probably know more than I do.
How old is that banjo, and is that tuned like a 5-string banjo without the 5th string?
No. It is probably 15 years old. That's all. Maybe 20. And it is tuned like a guitar.
Oh.
Yeah. This way I can start playing the banjo right away. Because, the banjo, I do it in I do 5 different programs. The music, songs and stories of the Civil War, of Stephen Foster, of the women of the Civil War, of the Irish soldiers in the Civil War, and of course this one. And I played the banjo on some of them, and it really kind of breaks things up, and it's nice, and it got me to play right away. But the thing I discovered, I played the guitar forever, and I've been in an Irish band for 30 years. I'd go to Irish sessions, and you go to an Irish session, and a lot of the guys are guitar players and fiddle players, and it wasn't until I brought in a banjo that I realized that there's a hierarchy. They had always ignored me as a guitar player, but a banjo player had a special status. And that status was At the top of the hierarchy were fiddles, cellos, keyboards, and then the banjo down here. This is where they were. You are the subject of jokes. There are hundreds of banjo jokes, and banjo players even tell them about themselves. But there's a story that I like, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about what people think about banjo players and how they are held in such low regard. There's a man named Robert, and Robert is a bridge player. And if you know Robert like I know Robert, Robert is always on time. He's in a bridge club downtown. 7 o'clock every Tuesday night, he is there like grim death. You know at 7 o'clock he is going to be there. Well, it's 7 o'clock this one Tuesday. No Robert. Where is Robert? And the people, they're really getting worried. They like Robert and they know he's on time. Something's wrong. 7:15, 7:20, 7:25, the door opens and in comes Robert. And they said, Robert, what happened to you on the way here? You're always on time. He says, well, I was going to be on time, but I'm coming down the street, and right in front of me, 5 guys are beating up a banjo player. And they said, well, did you help? He said, it looked like that was enough. Well, thank you very much and good evening.
You mentioned the Irish workers and the promise of whiskey. All I could think of was no blarney. I just wondered, do you know any songs that they might sing about the Irish getting drunk on the...
Yep.
Yep.
About 1,000 of them. Yeah, I was in an Irish band, so all we did was sing Irish drinking songs, whiskey in the jar. But there's a song I didn't sing tonight because I'm so raspy. I got better as it went on. The notes are really high. It's called "Paddy on the Canal," and it's about that. Yeah, Irish drinking songs. I've been a moonshiner for many's a year. You know, it's funny. My Irish, many years ago, our 5 children were very young, including, I had a 3-year-old, my son Patrick. And rehearsal for the band was always at my house on Tuesday nights, 4 years. And one night, we had a boy from Ireland staying with us for six weeks, from Northern Ireland. And we're videotaping, and I got the guitar out, and all 5 of my, well, I didn't have 5 children, I had 4, including my 3-year-old Patrick, and this boy from Ireland, we all sang The Moonshiner, about an Irish drinking song. And as I watched that, I couldn't believe my 3-year-old knew all the words.
That's bad.
So is that the top 4 strings of the guitar that's tuned as, or the bottom 4?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is that tuned?
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. This is,
the bottom
this is the high E.
Okay.
That's the high E. It makes it easier. The thing that you lose, of course, are the bass runs. You can't play any bass runs when you only have 4 strings, and I do a lot of that with the guitar.
I've seen it with 6 strings.
I have too. Mostly 5s. Mostly 5s. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you again
Oh, my
for
pleasure.
coming out. Thank you, everyone. Quick PSAs. Dressmakers work, dressmaking in the 19th century is up for 1 more week. So if you haven't had a chance to look through, please do. And speaking of the Erie Canal, we actually have 2 new exhibits going up in July. The first is Batter Up Baseball in Batavia, and the second is the Holland Land Company and the Erie Canal. So by mid-July, we'll have 2 new exhibits up for you to check out. Upcoming events, the next Java with Joe is Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Russ Benson will be here. He is a married to a veterinarian, but he's also a former K-9 unit operator for the Air Force and was actually over in Thailand during the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called The Amazing Skipper, which is about his life with his dogs, including his partner Skipper that was in the military with. In July, we have a lot coming up. We have a special event at the library, but we're co-sponsoring it. It's an author's talk with David Kinney, who wrote Batavia's Disorderly House, the story of Madame Edna Gruber. So that'll be Monday, July 14th at 7 p.m. over at the library. We do have some copies of the book if you haven't gotten yours yet. Henry Grace will be here for another concert on Thursday, July 17th at 7 p.m. And Bart Dentino will be here. He was supposed to be here last month. We had some illness around him, so he's good to go now. July 31st is a Thursday night at 7 p.m. He'll be doing his full repertoire. And we have guest speaker Joyce Thompson-Hovey will be here Tuesday, July 22nd to speak about Anna Ella Carroll, who was involved in every aspect of the Civil War, including being a confidant of Abraham Lincoln during the war. So definitely want to check that out. So there's a lot going on, and there's even more than probably what I've said, but we hope to see you at some of it. And we do have air conditioning in this room, so if it gets too hot outside, just come and see us. So thank you everyone. Have a great night.